Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this last panel. My name is Benjamin Seiler. I'm a professor here in the School of International Development and Global Studies. You can't hear me? Okay, sorry.
Bring it right into your mouth. Yeah.
Is it okay? Better? This way? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So I start over again. My name is Benjamin Seiler. I'm a professor here in the Faculty of Social Sciences. And my own work is also on international relations, international institutions, international security issues writ large. And it's my great pleasure to not only welcome you, but also to introduce you to our distinguished panelists today. For the last panel, what path is forward for Canada? I'm not going to spend too much time on sort of introducing the speakers in greater detail. You have all their bios. All this is to say perhaps a couple of words. To my immediate right and your left is the Honorable Mary-Lou McPhedran. She is a human rights lawyer and is an independent senator since November 2016. She also holds the distinction of holding the Order of Canada. She received that in 1985. And she's also an educator as the founding principal of the University of Winnipeg's Global College. Further details, again, are in the bio. Robin Collins, to my far right, to your far left, is a civil society activist. And he's the co-chair of the Canadian Network to Abolish Nuclear Weapons and the secretary of the Canadian Pugwash Group, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Without further ado, and again, the details are in the bio section. Without further ado, I've asked the panelists to speak for about 12 minutes. My own experience on being on these kinds of panels, if you shoot for 12 minutes, it's going to end up with like 15 minutes anyways. So I gave them sort of 12 minutes to work with, and you will hear a little sort of sound on my sort of mobile device here, which kind of will indicate to you if you haven't finished to please wrap up, because I've heard the premium is being paid on the discussions and questions from the audience, so we want to make sure that we have enough time to address your questions. So without further ado from me, over to the Honorable McPhedran.
She wants me to go first, is that right?
Robin has very kindly. I just explained in a conversation with Robin that I'm now a parliamentarian, which means my entire life is reacting to things. And so he has very kindly agreed to be the next speaker. Thank you.
So take that off of her time, right?
Yeah.
Thanks very much, everybody, for sticking it out to the last panel. I hope we can keep you awake. I'm going to say enough things that are so outstanding or ridiculous that you'll waken up if you've fallen asleep. But the topic I'm going to focus on is primarily on autonomous and AI, because I think some of the material that was presented has filled in some of the gaps, and I think all of the categories that have been discussed at the panels are leading us in the direction of it. So this is my sort of conclusion statement, so that I can go on with the content rather than end with the conclusion that we are looking at transparency and confidence building measures that Canada can implement, legally binding conventions that Canada can support, codes of conduct, hotlines between competing states, and dialogue. So that's the framework, I think, of all of the panels. That's kind of what we're leading to. I'm going to be talking about some specifics especially in the AI area, rather than on every subject and recommending something for Canada. So actually, I was going to start with a joke, but it'll just cut into my time. Okay. So I attended a lecture many years ago. John Siegler was giving the presentation. Some of you would know him, Carleton University prof, very progressive, very strong. The late John Siegler, very strong in Palestine-Israel issues. And I think this was around 9/11. He was speculating in this meeting that because there was a disproportionate number of electrical engineers or electronics engineers or both among the terrorists of 9/11, that he was wondering whether their thinking pattern was somehow drawn from, or the way they thought, from the sort of digital world, and such that they thought in black and white, and they thought in good and evil, and so that led them in this direction. He was making a sociological comment, but he was speculating. Does this explain why there's so many engineers amongst the people who flew the planes? So I was working at Nortel at that time. By the way, this is probably why they put me on this panel. They think, he works at Nortel, he fixes our computers. Let's have him talk about AI, right? So, but anyway, so I mentioned this suggestion to a colleague of mine who is originally from Iran. What do you think about this this concept that that the thinking pattern of these digital engineers drove them in this black and white thinking? And he says, I don't know. He says, maybe, but I'm an analog engineer. Now, there was actually some people that laughed this time. So I've told this comment many, many times, and virtually nobody understands it. But if I was in a room of engineers, they would be rolling on the floor with that joke, right? Anyway, that was the joke. So Cesar said I could say it. Now I'll start my 15 minutes, right?
9.
9. Oh, geez. Okay, let's start with the notion that old technology in warfare is obsolete. This is not necessarily so. In the current edition of Foreign Affairs Journal, Stephen Biddle, in his article Back to the Trenches, points out that the current moment isn't quite another revolution in military affairs, even though militaries will, of course, incrementally update their force technology, countermeasures, and capabilities. But as the Ukraine-Russia war shows us, tanks are not obsolete after all, even if they are joined by drones and satellites delivering guidance. This is not a drone versus drone war. But some new technology will be unstoppable. We're not going to be able to stop unmanned drone technology, for instance, for many reasons, which I won't go into. At best, we can try to regulate their usage, which in times of war can be like whistling in the wind. On the other hand, and in the same issue of Foreign Affairs Journal, Bramer and Suleiman offer a very sober and disturbing evaluation of the likely speed that new technologies will take over and dominate. This is driven by artificial intelligence and will outpace our regulatory systems, both national and international, simply because of the accelerative nature of AI, the clumsiness of international diplomacy, and the limits of international verification and enforcement regimes. The article in Foreign Affairs, frankly, is frightening, and I really recommend that you all read it. It's in the current issue. Thankfully, it arrived in time for me. They recommend, in brief, a few options, which I'm going to describe, for developing cooperative mechanisms to slow and to control the pace of things, including involving companies and engineers at the table, not just nation states and international bodies. So Bramer and Suleiman recommend we focus on 3 urgent institution building considerations. 1, as a fact-finding effort, establish a global scientific body, as was done for climate with the IPCC, to objectively advise governments and international bodies. 2nd, manage tensions between the 2 main state players, the USA and China. We've heard a lot of this today, using verification and monitoring approaches. Easier said than done. But however, the AI problem, which is mostly open sourced, they argue, is highly decentralized and requires a global commons approach. Common theme over the last couple of days. They suggest establishing a geotechnical stability board along the lines of the financial stability board, and one which is supported by national regulatory and international standard setting, ISO bodies. 3rd, some level of censorship will be necessary, they argue, to block dangerous AI models. This will all require a high level of international cooperation and agreement, in effect, an anti-proliferation project requiring interventionist cyber tools. All of these regimes that they outline need to be universal if security is to succeed. They quote, I quote, foolish unilateral disarmament won't work, they argue. And unlike chemical and nuclear weapons, AI-driven weaponry has the potential for being quasi-autonomous. With AI technology breaches, the securing of risks must be essentially perfect, because a single spoiler or bad player can spell doom. These are likely to be high-level asymmetrical threats. This makes the problem and solutions extremely complex. AI is connected to our cities, infrastructure, hospitals, banks, internet, obviously, as well as for military purposes. Everything is implicated. To put this into perspective, there are 206 states recognized by the UN, not all voting states, but there are 58,000 artificial intelligence companies in the world, with 15,000 of them in the US alone. What is really outdated and showing its age is our widely held assumption that arms racing and competitive security, striving for superiority, can go on indefinitely, and that our technological edge will be unchallenged and will save us from external threats. This idea is too expensive and too dangerous, and we cannot afford or risk it. It is, however, the prevailing idea. On the other hand, if we were to agree that stability requires allies, competitors, and foes and adversaries alike, that they all maintain only moderate levels of threat protection for mutual benefit, why wouldn't we dramatically lower those levels to reduce provocation, cost, and risk? The result is essentially the same. That is, some level of deterrence, not the same, but less threat, less cost, less diversion of precious resources and human capital. Instead of elevating every state to achieve maximum provocation, why not bring everyone down? Deal with breakouts and spoilers together, and find non-war solutions to conflicts as they arise. For Canada, there are niches where Canada can help regulate technologies of concern. Some of these areas have been discussed in the earlier panels, but let me restate some. I will start with a far-fetched idea for you to ponder. Consider deploying AI for conflict resolution. Would both sides of a conflict listen to a neutral AI arbitrator that would offer complex but fair solutions to impenetrable problems? What if the prediction in total casualties and generational costs were calculated and this projects a horror show? Or there's the expectation of a forever stalemate with endless casualties. Of course, AI might predict a winner too. Would that be so bad if concessions were offered to compensate the expected loser? Fate of nations decided by robots, not painless, but mostly casualty-free. So I submitted 3 queries to Chatbox AI. You're not the only one, Tarek, that used it. This week, 3 queries. I was assessing whether AI might be used on my phone as a neutral arbitrator directed to effect conflict resolution of a difficult war. The obvious example was the Ukraine-Russia war. I had 3 variants of the same question. The one that follows has the most elements, that is including the reference to Crimea, NATO, Donbass, the EU disagreements. Most interesting to me was that without any mentioning of NATO, specifically in the first 2 queries, the AI software didn't refer in either to its solution as part of the, didn't refer to NATO in its solution to the crisis. This is despite the fact that the NATO component is supposed to be the primary provocation to Putin Russia. As they say in this sort of phenomenon, garbage in, garbage out. So my third of 3 queries was this question: what is a fair and reasonable resolution to the Ukraine-Russia war that takes all sides into consideration and responds to the demand that Crimea remain part of Russia as well as Russian concerns about Ukraine joining NATO and the European Union? I could show the answer to you to that question, and I'm sure you're dying to know what it was. But in brief, in all three of the answers, Ukraine gets back Crimea and the Donbass, but gives up some jurisdiction. The solution took about 12 seconds. But here's my point. Would nation-state leaders ever submit to or defer to a neutral arbitration of a complex issue, even if they agreed that the algorithm parameters could be both comprehensive and unbiased? Or will power, tribal loyalties, and hatred more likely trump any fair deal? The problem is not with the AI in a case such as this, a problem the UN is faced with regularly, but with we human beings and our reluctance to work together with others. It is the hesitancy of our national collectives to collaborate to resolve conflicts before they escalate. Don't believe that. No, actually, I'm not that far from completion.
You can have some of my time.
So back to Canada and what we should do about cyber AI and related threats. And I borrow here some ideas from a recent webinar that I attended, Canadian Government's Internet Forum, The Future We Want, which was excellent. I recommend watching. I think it was taped. Top priorities that Canada can include: developing strategies on how to implement a code of conduct. The current entity in Canada is AIDA, that is the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. This is early days, and AIDA is a small organization, but many think it is on the right track. Secondly, Canada can devote resources towards dealing with disinformation from authoritarian regimes and explore digital rights and protection, as well as enhance trust in the safer deployment of AI technologies. There's an obligation to respond to digital authoritarianism, electoral interference, and infrastructure disruption. Third, Canada holds the presidency of the G7 in 2025 and can play a role in developing a strategy for multilateral engagement, addressing new threats. The G7 is important because it has its status, but it also needs to cooperate with other states. Fourth, there are several entities focusing on AI, including UNESCO. Slovenia has a conference in 2024, a global conference on AI and human rights. The proposed establishment of a competency framework, an African Union framework, a European Union AI Act. The UK has been working on ISO standards. I can go on and on and on and on. Canada can help in this direction by promoting a commons-based approach with ethical and security obligations. Voluntary codes of conduct need to become legislation and enforceable international treaty-based agreements. Fifth, Canada can support a high-level advisory body for the UN Secretary General. Others have talked about this. Sixth, Canada can promote AI in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Seventh, Canada can continue to be an early champion of the Digital Charter and the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Artificial Intelligence, and also for towards new agenda for peace and the Global Digital Compact and the UN Summit for the future of 2024. All of these are combinable. All it's the same principle, same concept, international engagement. And eighth, and I'll leave it at this, Canada has expertise in conflict resolution and confidence building measures in the areas of verification that can be enhanced with new sensory tracking, reporting, and weapons destruction technologies. So, one other thing, of the four categories that we discussed, and Cesar said the same thing at the beginning of today, which was actually the conclusion of my presentation. So it's a good reflection back.
Robin, I need you to wrap up.
This is it. It's one sentence. Of the four categories, cyberspace, AI, and nuclear weapons modernization, only one is a single-purpose technology that provides only existential threat. All the others have dual usage. That one, that is nuclear threat and modernization, requires elimination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. What I suggest we do is we're gonna sort of move swiftly into the second presentation and sort of collect your questions and comments in sort of the session afterwards.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I want to begin by acknowledging that I come from Manitoba, and that is Treaty 1 territory. It is also the homeland of the Métis Nation, and that the Parliament of Canada is situated on unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. I feel very inadequate to this task in that I don't want to be a whiner, and yet I feel that I have very little compelling positive news to report from the parliamentary front. I want to, from my heart, I want to thank many of you in this room. I'm looking particularly at you, Doug Roche, and colleagues, Peggy, Cesar, I mean, the list goes on, my colleagues here, for being the voices of clarity around not only the problem, but also the viable solutions. The fact that in a political context, a parliamentary context, I feel that we have made little or no progress on those solutions doesn't mean that they're not there and that we hold them in high regard. We do. I can say to you that colleagues with whom I work closely on this issue, in particular Heather McPherson and Elizabeth May, there are others, but the three of us tend to be the ones that are back and forth more often, that one of the things that we are feeling very good about is the fact that there is going to be a youth parliament nuclear summit. It's going to happen is today the 20th? Yes.
Probably.
Yes, today's the 20th, yes. So it's a month from today, November 20th, 21st, mostly in parliamentary spaces. And we have already very strong partnerships. The planning committee is a planning committee of young leaders. The organization with that planning group that is most facilitating is Reverse the Trend. And some of you may or may not know the organization. It is a youth organization. I'm just going to read very briefly from their mission, just to give you a sense of Reverse the Trend. It's been a real pleasure for me. I've been working with them now for close to 2 years. And a very interesting evolution has occurred within my office because several of the young leaders that are part of my youth advisory, most of them from Manitoba, that some of them started with me when they were still in high school. And they're now all in university. And actually, they've all become very active in Reverse the Trend. In no way is this a competition. In no way is this, they're not going to do the work they were doing with us on the advisory, but it's an interesting evolution to me that they found an organizational home that is youth-led. And here's one of the, a short quote from Reverse the Trend mission. For years now, youth have been speaking out about climate change and nuclear devastation, and have been demanding action from leaders as this is the existential threat that requires immediate attention. Unfortunately, our plea for action has fallen on deaf ears. While youth are passionate about the issue of climate change and nuclear disarmament, the tools for effective mobilization are missing. What youth need are direct pathways to engage with global leaders. And this is one of the few organizations that I know of that actually puts right together the threat of nuclear escalation and the climate crisis, making them connected, very, very closely connected. I think they're correct in this approach. I think we could learn a lot more in my generation to not keep putting the climate crisis here and then trying to deal with issues like the threat of nuclear weapons over here. I think they're very closely connected. And that is the approach that we are taking for this Youth Parliament Summit. Primarily co-hosted by Heather McPherson, Elizabeth May, and myself, and chosen to occur 1 week before the second meeting of the states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And we have, as I've mentioned, a number of partners. I want to specifically mention Project Plowshares and the fact that we have had support from Dr. Jennifer Simons and the Simons Foundation in order to facilitate some of the participation that will occur. This is by no means limited to youth. One of the guiding principles for those of us on the planning group is that this is intergenerational, and that we are talking about not only intergenerational dialogue, but we also aspire to developing intergenerational joint advocacy measures. And we are hoping to make a fairly clear statement. I think at this point, the short term we're using is wake-up call from the summit on the 21st that will come out. And I want to issue a very warm invitation to everybody here. If this is something where the dates work for you, most of the activities will occur in parliamentary meeting rooms, probably mostly in the Senate. And we'll have those details very soon. One of the measures when thinking about the title for today, What Path Forward for Canada? And I know this is something that I share with many of you, the attempts that so many of us made to just try to get Canada to Vienna last June. And I don't even know all of the conversations that occur. I certainly have a sense of the number of times that Elizabeth, Heather, and I had meetings, had conversations, had individual lobby meetings in the hallway, etc. And I can say to you that we really did think that they were going to send observers. We really did think, based on a number of those conversations, including with the minister, that some parliamentarians, hopefully us, since we were the ones that had been really bringing the issue forward, were going to get to Vienna just as observers. And we kept sending in the information, okay, so Norway's going to do it, Germany's going to do it, the Netherlands is going to do it. Why isn't Canada stepping up here? It was really at the very last minute that they gave us a decisive no. And they did not give us an explanation. And it was one of those times when the message was delivered by a parliamentary secretary, and I think he had trouble looking us in the eye in delivering that message. So as it turned out, I was the only Canadian parliamentarian in Vienna, and so I was very pleased to be there for the founding of parliamentarians for the TPNW. There is going to be a second meeting of the group on November 27th as the second meeting starts at the UN. I will be there for that. I think there's a very high probability that a number of parliamentarians are going to be there. It is one of the few destinations that we're allowed to use our own parliamentary travel budget. So I think I'm much more hopeful this time that we will have we may not have the blessing of Global Affairs Canada, but thankfully that doesn't matter. In a significant way, we can still go, we can still do it, we can still try to engage as much as possible to bring about the kind of shift that we need to see in leadership. I'm often encouraged by the fact that if our current Prime Minister looked back on what his father did on this issue, he would see that Pierre Trudeau, largely under his own steam, met with world leaders and actually created a shift in the NATO policy at that time, created an opening. And it's not something that has survived, but it still is, I think, when we're told off the record, of course, in the quote, under the cone discussion, that it was the Americans saying, don't do this. It was NATO officials saying, really, you're a stalwart member of NATO and you need to uphold our policy. In a brief conversation before this panel started, Peggy was observing that the NATO policy is a policy, and we have treaties that are in place. And I'm very struck also by the statement that was made just on October 16th by someone that I consider to be probably, certainly in the current lineup, by far one of our most sophisticated diplomats, who has often taken a position of real courage and leadership, and that, of course, is our permanent representative to the UN in New York, the Honorable Bob Ray. And it's kind of amazing to me that this statement that was made just about a week ago, less than a week ago, where the emphasis is on leadership that's needed, where he says that Canada strongly supported the working group on strengthening the review process. He talks about the CTBT. He also says that it's incredibly important for the nuclear countries to step up. And the entire speech does not mention the TPNW, not even mention it. And I find that when we see, when I read language that talks about the need for leadership, that says, for example, it is simply unacceptable that 30 years have passed since our first resolution calling for negotiations on such a treaty. Regrettably, he's not talking about the TPNW, obviously. Regrettably, some states have become all too comfortable with the status quo. Despite differences, key states must come to the table and undertake negotiations without preconditions. But he's not even mentioning the TPNW. And as young people point out to me, they say, so it's been 50 years with that treaty, and it's not gone anywhere. And it's been almost 30 years with that other treaty, and it hasn't really taken hold. And it took 4 years to get the activation of the TPNW. What's going on? And I'm not able to give them a rational explanation for what's going on. I feel really, I come from being a prof, and I try to have explanations that are full and have and help people understand. And I'm at a loss on this one. So what's the path forward for Canada? I think it's more of what we've been trying to do. I think that the gatherings that we can bring about, where we are engaging parliamentarians, where we can actually have this improbable reality examined more closely. I want to note for you that the ICANN parliamentary pledge in our own parliament, I mean, we can remember 2010 when the Senate led on the resolution on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. And within months, the House of Commons joined, and we had exactly the same joint resolution of the two houses of our parliament. And congratulations, Doug, and all of you in this room who succeeded in getting that. What we have as it's not an equivalent at all, but it is hopefully a starting point, is the ICANN parliamentary pledge has actually been signed by over 40 senators and I think close to 50 MPs. I also have to honestly tell you that when we write to them and invite them, as we have, of course, for the breakfast with Tariq on the 24th at 8 a.m., very few of them come. Very few of them come. And of course, I'll be inviting them to co-host the Youth Parliament Summit, and we're going to have a parliamentary reception, which is sometimes a way to engage parliamentarians at least a little bit. And in terms of a path forward for Canada, I would just say somehow we have to do even more of this kind of civil society, parliamentarian coming together to ask the tough questions of the government. There doesn't seem to be a clear rational explanation for why we're so stuck, but we are. And what we do together is the only way we're going to make a difference.
Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you for staying on time. So we have about 25 minutes or so to hear questions and comments from the audience. Perhaps if you quickly introduce yourself, and then if you haven't already done so, and then
I'll introduce myself. I'm Tariq Rauf. We worked at the Canadian Center for Arms Control and Disarmament that unfortunately no longer exists. Well, Senator Patwiran, I really wanted to thank you and appreciate your hard work. Sometimes it's a few lonely voices who get the thing going. So I'm glad that you are persevering, and you and your colleagues, and I hope you will continue. When the current Prime Minister got elected, on that very day, I sent him a letter from Vienna, FedEx, and I have proof that it was delivered to the PMO, where I suggested to him that he set up an independent parliamentary funded center or think tank to work on these issues. And I gave him the example of the US Institute for Peace, funded by Congress, and also the Woodrow Wilson Center, funded by Congress. And I suggested perhaps he could name it after his father. And that at that time, there was a vacant plot of land next to the new War Museum, and he could construct it there. I never heard back from him. And then later somebody told me what the reason was, which I don't want to repeat here. But I was wondering whether you might consider with your colleagues to reestablish a Canadian center to work on these issues, because we need Canadian thinking. Mm-hmm. We don't need to rely on thinking done in Washington or Brussels or London. And I think one of the reasons why Mr. Ray did not mention the TPNW is that now there is coalescence among NATO states to stand up in a stronger way against the TPNW as the treaty has entered into force and it's gaining momentum. And at the Vienna NPT meeting, Germany, Italy, and Netherlands made this astounding statement that NATO nuclear weapons have been seamlessly integrated into the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and nobody should complain about them. And this is something where I think Canada and people like you and us, we should push back that this has never happened, that this was not correct. But this is their way of pushing back against the power of the TPNW and more countries and civil society that's backing it up. So thank you very much for all your efforts. And I also thank you for going to the TPNW MSP2 when it takes place. Thanks.
I was going to, are you going to comment on that?
Oh, yes, but please go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that this solidarity of NATO appears to be the primary argument why that is given for Canada not attending as observer. We spent a lot of time, and we had conversations too, and several MPs and a petition and so on and so on. That we felt we were very, very close to GAC telling us that they would send an observer. But it seemed to be, I don't know that we were given an explanation, but I think we were given the hint that it was all about NATO solidarity, whatever. So here's what's different this time. The NATO solidarity has already been breached last time. That's not an excuse anymore. Now it's the question of whether Canada is going to climb on the right side, or is going to sort of sit in the back again and let it happen and let their allies within the alliance hang separately, or whether we're going to help. And so tomorrow, We do have a GAC official attending our meeting, and let's all ensure that we make it very clear that we expect Canada to attend as an observer.
I think any dialogue with anyone at any level is probably worth it at this point. But I have to say that without ministerial leadership, I think we're really up against it. I'm thinking when Tariq was speaking about the center, I mean, I'm thinking about what Canada did on responsibility to protect and the incredible scope that we have used on a number of occasions in multilateral situations. And again, you know, it's not wanting to sound like an old fogey, but it takes a certain kind of ministerial leadership. And to a large extent, we really don't see that in this cabinet, anywhere in this cabinet. It just kind of isn't the way they do business.
Thank you. Earl Turcott. I'm a member of the Canadian Pugwash Group. Thank you, Senator McFedrin and Robin, for your great presentations. And Senator, thank you very much for making reference to the 2010 unanimous motion in the Senate and the House of Commons, you know, in support of pursuing nuclear disarmament. You, and I'm sure most in this room, if not all, are also aware of the 2018 House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defense all-party recommendation that Canada play a leadership role within NATO to pursue, to launch an international initiative to pursue discussions that would hopefully lead to something more nuclear disarmament. I would like to get your views on sort of whether or not that has resonated in any great way among parliamentarians. Robin and Sylvie and I and several others have, and many in this room actually have met members of parliament individually and sometimes in small groups to advocate. And we know that there are individuals in all parties, as you well know, who would support this. But the leadership, our current government leadership, seems to be resistant. With respect to TPNW, I am a huge fan, and I'm sure we all are. However, I don't believe for a moment that NATO countries at this point are prepared to join the TPNW if for no other reason that they were not involved in its negotiation. I think national ego plays a very, very large role here. However, our ultimate goal is not universalization of TPNW. That is a means to an end. Our ultimate goal is nuclear abolition. So with respect to that, Canada is well placed, as you all know, to play a leadership role within NATO in encouraging the negotiation of a new nuclear weapons convention that would be in every way complementary to the TPNW and ultimately to achieve the same goal. And then NATO countries could take the lead in engaging other nuclear armed states and their umbrella nations, you know, and hopefully ultimately negotiate a new treaty that would achieve the same result. I guess my question is, what do you think the prospects are? Or do you think the prospects would be better if we pursue encouraging Canada to engage others in negotiating a new treaty as opposed to continuing to press Canada to join the TPNW while still encouraging them to attend as observers, but put the emphasis on negotiating a new complementary nuclear weapons convention? Thank you.
Sure, yeah. To be honest, I haven't even heard that as an idea until you just mentioned it. And I'm by no means an expert, but I have spent about 20 plus years in UN settings and been in some of those negotiations in the more optional protocols, but the treaty negotiation process. And I'm completely overwhelmed by your suggestion. Like, I can't find a place right now to think of it as being feasible, but doesn't mean I'm rejecting it. It just means it strikes me as the kind of resources that have to be marshaled for that. If Canada were to have any authenticity, I think, and credibility, there would have to be a willingness to take the kind of leadership that we did with the responsibility to protect doctrine and actually create a working body. If anybody here has any thought that there would be receptivity in this government, I'd be very delighted to hear it. I have no sense of that, but that's just a very immediate, intuitive reaction to what you've said. I think, though, that, I mean, we're shooting so low. It's so easy to send an observer or to send a small delegation. They're just in New York. I mean, that's where I'm going to continue to press. And I think for right now, the parliamentarians, it just seems like such a no-brainer. We're going to definitely keep trying again, as we did last year with Vienna.
Robin?
So there is a proposal that's been in circulation for a couple of years that came out of Abolition 2000 working group. I'm a member of the working group and helped draft in a small way the reset proposal, it's called, which is, I mean, to put it into short form, the vehicle by which we achieve abolition does not actually matter. The abolition is what's important. There are three options out there: the TPNW, the Nuclear Weapons Convention, of which there's a model. The model has been actually supported by China and others in the past, and or a vehicle of mechanisms, package of mechanisms. So we distributed this at the NPT again this year and last year as well. We sent it to GAC a few times, and they are receptive. But to the point, the government receptive? No, but the idea was of this project was, if you're not going to sign the TPNW, then to pick another one out of the hat. There's lots of options out there. And meanwhile, attend the TPNW, because that shows that you are in support of the mission of the treaty, even if you're unwilling to sign it, and that you show your cards as abolition, pro-abolition, and that you're not opposing it because you're against abolition. You're opposing it because of the process, or whatever your excuse is.
I would just add that I think I saw a glimmer of optimism as a parliamentarian at the 30th Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, which happened to be in Vancouver this past July. And I was there with a number of other Canadian parliamentarians. And there was a very intense debate about the TPNW, and it was positioned in that debate by one side as the TPNW versus the NPT, and that they were against each other, and that we were, all those countries had signed on to the NPT, and the TPNW was some kind of interloper. What won the day, though, in that debate, and I give credit to our Canadian parliamentarian Dr. Hetty Fry. She spoke and she has a very high profile in the OSCE and a lot of credibility. She was actually the head of our delegation. And she really pushed back on this idea that there's some kind of a conflict. And what came out of it, and it is in the final set of resolutions, responding to nuclear escalation and talking specifically about the complementarity of these two treaties, and going with the language that they needed, OSCE states needed to redouble international efforts to achieve the global elimination of nuclear weapons within a time-bound framework. So much of Robin's point, which treaty, the abolition is what matters. So I think that the other glimmer that we saw was in May, after years of it not occurring. There was a consultation with civil society that Global Affairs held. I don't know, was anybody here at that actual meeting? Okay, good. So you'll have a much better idea. I know that a number of the young people that I work with were also at that meeting. I'll just share with you as a little anecdotal thing. They basically refused to let me attend that meeting. it was a really, really interesting process of where global affairs just basically gave me the run around at 3 different levels within the, and I was so surprised that it was such a big deal. I come from civil society. I'm used to being part of these things, and I thought parliamentarians were welcome, but that's not what happened.
You're most welcome, Senator McFadden, in our meetings. Thank you so much. I mean, I want to echo Tariq. Thank you so much. So such a privilege and good fortune to have you as a champion of these causes, and I mean it, and we don't take it for granted. It's very, very significant. And I'll share very briefly. I hope you don't mind. So last year in Vienna, I almost got in trouble. We almost got in trouble.
Yeah,
because Senator McFadden's entrance had prepared these signs that said, "Where is Canada?" Like visually, "Where is Canada?" And we got on stage with the signs and were scolded, and I feared we were going to be kicked out of the venue of this multilateral conference. But anyway, that's anecdotal. My question is about the pulse of Parliament, Senator. Why is it that you and Elizabeth and Heather are a lonely voice? Why don't we have 20 or 30 or dozens of parliamentarians engaged? You know, the Ukraine crisis is reminding everybody of the nuclear threat. The Oppenheimer movie reminded some people of the nuclear devastation possibility. One assumes that parliamentarians are generally well informed about these things. To what do you attribute the fact that you're valuable as your voice is a minority? So that's my question to you.
I don't have an explanation. I have another glimmer, and that is when Paul was with us on Parliament Hill and we had breakfast. You probably remember this. I mean, we had 5 Conservative MPs come to that breakfast. Now, they sat at the back of the room and they didn't engage, but I did manage, I know one of them quite well, and I did manage to sort of talk afterwards informally. And what he said was that it's on their list now. And so they're paying attention, I think in a very guarded way, but I think that's a glimmer. I'm not presuming the positioning, but just showing up, I think was a good sign. I also feel, and I could be proven completely wrong about this, I feel like we've got to be close to a tipping point. I mean, how can we be looking at the weaponization of nuclear plants in Ukraine? I mean, the information that's available, and this is something that young people keep saying to me, which is exactly that question. How can they not be responding? How can they not? And I just have to say back to them, look, this is all about constituency politics. If they're not hearing it when they go home, it's very difficult, very, very difficult to claim a parliamentarian's time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I mean, that's part of it.
And to Robin, very quickly, Robin, this NATO solidarity trap, or for lack of a better word, I guess the question is about Canada's ability to craft an independent foreign policy. And but you have pointed rightly, I believe, that the NATO solidarity is not just there, but increasing and more entrenched. What hope is there? I mean, is foreign policy more a function of Ottawa or more a function of Brussels? I mean, in your view,
Or Washington.
or Washington?
I get, they must be thinking, I'm speculating, they must be thinking, what's the gain versus, they're doing a weighing, and they figure they can get away with it on our side, but they can't get away with it on NATO side or US side. And especially like now, the conflicts that are going on now, if this wasn't the Ukraine, actually, let me suggest this. If there wasn't the Ukraine-Russia war, I bet you Canada would have attended. Now, whether that can be said this time or not, it's a little different. It's slightly different kind of pace. I mean, the rhetoric's slightly different. Maybe they will this time to show their credibility. So we've got, what's the date for the?
We'll know in a couple of months.
What's the date for the second meeting of?
27th November.
So that's our time frame.
Month.
Yeah,
5
we've got a
weeks.
month to do it.
Get on it.
Get busy.
Thank you.
I wanted to just track one more thing onto my response to you about why do we have this seeming impasse. In very practical terms, I just want to share that we see that parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, which was, I guess, the driving force for the 2010 joint resolutions of both houses of parliament, has not had a profile in more recent times. And we're working to try and change that. There are some considerations that we have to have in it, but certainly, again, the civil society partnership is absolutely crucial as well.
Let me make one more comment on that because it just struck me. I remembered something. I can't remember which one of the two. I think it was the unanimous motion. We were talking with global affairs people, and they were non-proliferation, whatever group, and we mentioned this. This is the first time we mentioned it to them, and they said they'd never heard of it.
I believe that.
There's a disconnect here. I mean, they're not reading our stuff. That's possible, but they're not getting the message from higher ups and vice versa.
And it's generational.
Yeah, and how much of and also it's the they keep the churn. They don't have the historically but what's the word I'm thinking of? The institutional memory. They lack the institutional memory. So, these are resolvable things, right? Now, maybe we're not doing our job. We did our job. You're right. We did. We are doing our job. They're not doing their job. I guess that's the point.
But I think the timeliness is here, and it's really just continuing to push and to try and continue to create as many venues as possible. I'm very grateful to Jim Kresge because I wrote to him some time ago before we even had the dates firm for the summit and asked whether Hill Times would be a media partner for the Youth Parliament Nuclear Summit. And he wrote back right away and said yes. Parliamentarians don't read a lot maybe, but they read the Hill Times. So hoping.
I'm just looking at the time, and it's 5 o'clock, and I know there's a panel right after us. So on behalf of everybody, the concluding remarks, I don't know who is doing that, but on behalf of everybody in the room, I want to thank both the Senator and Robin for your presentations. It was very much appreciated. And thanks for the audience for being so engaged.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to our final panel. It's been an amazing day. Now I realize Cesar and I are the only thing standing between you and your weekend. So we'll keep this very short and sweet. It really is just to thank everyone for an amazing conference. I know I speak for everyone when I say we've learned a lot. And for that, we are very grateful to our wonderful panelists. And indeed to all of you for the inspiring questions and comments. So thank you so much once again. And let me just say that our conversation is not yet over because on Monday, we are continuing on a similar theme. We have an event in honor of Tariq, and it's going to be on the important question of ending the menace of nuclear weapons. So I can't think of a more inspiring topic. I'm sure all of us are very much looking forward to getting an answer from him. I invite all of you to please join us on Monday. And for now, I would like to thank my friend Cesar and the Pugwash Group for our beautiful friendship, which continues. I think today's event is clear proof that we are as strong as ever and look forward to more cooperation, more events together in the future. I would also like to thank the CIPS team, Thomas, Jocelyn, Anna, and also the technicians who made it possible for all of us to communicate here today. Thank you. Finally, once again, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for being so patient. It's Friday afternoon, and it's very impressive that you're still here in the room and wide awake. So we appreciate it. Thank you. We wish you a wonderful weekend, and I will let Caesar finish the evening. But thank you.
Thank you very much. The feeling is mutual, the friendship, the willingness to continue, and I trust that we will be here again. I'm reading the room. I sense that people want a long speech right now from me. So, we return these? Okay. Housekeeping, please leave the name tags. Please leave the name tags. I won't be long. I just want to really, very genuinely express our gratitude to CIPS, to all the team, not just Alexandra, Anna, Jocelyn, Thomas, the technicians. On the Pugwash side, Robin Collins and Paul Meyer were very helpful in the organization of the event and the conceiving of the agenda. So thank you very much. I hope people don't leave with a feeling of despair, because it's easy to leave with a feeling of despair after discussing these thorny matters. And the reason why we should not be leaving with a feeling of despair is because we're on it. We're on this. We're paying attention to this. We have allies in the parliament. We have smart people in academia. We have smart people in Pugwash, in the Pugwash Group, and other groups in civil society. And you know, these are existential issues, some of them. Nuclear disarmament alone is a political struggle of the highest order. But we're not going to let them win. We're gonna persuade them to find better ways. Thank you very much.